if you're comparing whether to implement a sustainable choice, you sort of need something to show the alternate cost and the alternate gain of actually implementing those changes.
This podcast is a product of Vive, where we unlock sustainable businesses. Produced by Amplitude Ventures, your partners in early stage music tech.
Hi, and welcome to the very first episode of Business as Unusual. I'm Sara Fossum, and I'm the founder of Vive. And for the past 10 years, I've been working, researching, and learning in the field of sustainable business, trying to understand what it really looks like and what it could be. Along the way, I've had some honest and thought-provoking conversations with people across the industries. Conversation about real challenges, but also the huge opportunities in doing business differently. Too often, sustainability is treated as a compliance issue, something you have to do rather than something that can actually create value. But when approached the right way, sustainability can drive optimization, reduce risk, and open up entirely new ways of thinking about value, economically, socially, and environmentally. And that's what this podcast is about. So Business as Unusual is a space to explore how we rethink business, not just to meet targets, but to build companies that make sense for the long run. We'll talk to people with a range of perspectives who are navigating this space and trying to make change. And today, I am super excited to have Martin Gjessing joining us as our first guest. And Martin and I first met about a year ago when we sat down to explore a potential partnership. And right away, I could tell that he had a thoughtful and sharp perspective on sustainable business. So I'm super excited to further explore these perspectives and ideas. But first, welcome, Martin, and thank you for joining as our first guest.
Wow. Thank you very much, Sara. I'm truly excited and humbled, really, and just slightly nervous to be a part of this conversation, and especially since it's the first episode.
Yeah, it's the same here. It's the same here. But I thought just to start off, it would be great if you could just introduce yourself, just tell a bit about your background and what first sparked your interest in sustainability.
Yeah. I think I'll start with what first sort of sparked my interest, because that sounds like a good starting point for this conversation. And I think it was, for me at least, the first time I saw the documentary An Inconvenient Truth. And that might be sort of a stereotypical answer, but when I was watching it, this was probably during primary school or high school. And when I was watching it, I felt sort of a sense of urgency and a sense of responsibility. And I didn't really want to be part of the problem. I wanted to be part of the solution. And I think that's when I realized I sort of wanted to work with sustainability and also business strategy. So
Yeah,
that's where
I
I
can
started out.
I can resonate with that.
Yeah.
It's so funny how these kind of documentaries really, provoke these feelings and luckily get us to open our eyes to see how things really are.
Yeah.
But then why don't you also talk a bit about your career and your studies, and you didn't start with sustainability, you kind of went into that area after a while.
Yeah. Um, so I started out studying economic analysis at the University of Stavanger. And when I started at the university, sustainability had become a hot topic, really, um, especially surrounding the economics of climate change. And one of the central debates or sort of hot topics around that subject was whether or how you could put a price on carbon and CO2. And I remember that I was really struck by how financial models discounted the value of nature to uh, the extent of basically saying that it didn't matter at all, and referring to them as externalities. And I think that's a shockingly simplified way of viewing where all our resources come from. And I think that was sort of shocking for me to realize that we were still at this point. I believe we were past the point of looking at all our natural resources as just numbers on a spreadsheet. So, and that was also just before my final year at university. Michael Bloomberg and the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, also called TCFD, released their landmark report. And what I really liked about that was that it shifted the conversation from abstract ideas to more sort of concrete risks and opportunities tied to climate. And inspired by this, our master's thesis focused on climate risks in Norwegian aquaculture. And it was really an interesting sector to look at because it's a sector where economics and nature is very deeply intertwined. And yeah, it was easy to see how economics was influenced by these externalities.
Yeah,
So
definitely. I remember that was also one of my kind of, I thought that was very interesting to see. I also studied ecological economics, and that's when we really got into, like natural capital and all of the kind of discussions around that topic, because as you said, like on one end, like on one point, you have to, in order for it to fit into the economic models that we're all using, you need to set a number on the natural capital. But then again, some people are arguing that it's not possible to set a number because they are invaluable, right? You can't really replace them. So it's so difficult. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, what is your perspective on that discussion?
yeah, it's such a difficult topic because I believe that, at least for now, we're so sort of tied up in capitalism as a whole that you sort of need the numbers for it to make sense, at least when you're comparing, if you're comparing whether to implement a sustainable choice, you sort of need something to show the alternate cost and the alternate gain of actually implementing those changes. And in many cases, it's going to be a better choice either way to go for the sustainable option because of resource efficiency and many other factors. But I I still like the approach of the task force, or the task force angle of it, that you need to at least in some way incorporate it into the P&L to be able to visually comprehend or financially comprehend the implications that it has. But from my points, I might be slightly colored because I started out my career in accounting. So I am very used to putting numbers on pretty much everything. So I might be slightly biased.
Yeah. But then can you also talk a bit about like your way forward after your studies? Like what did you go into and how did you end up where you are today?
Yeah. I started out as an accountant, and there are many reasons why that's a good sort of starting point when working with economics. And I think one of them is that you get a really fundamental understanding of the basics of business and how businesses are constructed sort of in the world. But um, a big part of what we do as accountants is helping businesses stay compliant. And where I wanted to, or how I combined sort of my interest in sustainability with accounting was naturally with the compliance work of sustainability. And one of the things we were looking at was with the Transparency Act. We had a lot of clients who were had to comply with the Transparency Act. And that was sort of their first step into sustainability. And that is not a good place to start. When you're met with all of those actions you had to make in order to be compliant.
Yeah.
And it was really a tough starting point for businesses that didn't, that hadn't done anything related to sustainability before. And it's sort of, I understand why the Transparency Act was started and why it was implemented, but for SMEs in particular, it's really not a good starting point. It's so compliance focused and not at all really about value creation. And I think that's sort of one of the reasons as well why I didn't feel like the accounting industry was where I was supposed to be. The focus on simply being compliant or helping clients with economical analysis was not something that I was passionate enough about. I wanted to help them much more with how, yeah, I wanted them to,
Like create value and like
yeah,
see,
thank you.
yeah.
Not just about being compliant. I wanted them
Yeah.
to actually be able to create value and not being just a part of sort of what they were doing after they had done the things they wanted to do. I wanted them
Exactly.
to be part of helping them make that change in the first
Mm.
place.
And I think that's such a kind of common thing we see across companies, that kind of they're pushed to start implementing sustainability measures in terms of compliance measures because they have to, and then it becomes a checkbox and it's something that you have to do, and they don't really connect it to the actual value creation. They don't like, because it's so rushed, right? You get the regulation you have to comply with, and then you have to put in all of the measures. But in reality, if, as you said, they kind of starting with the endpoint and they're missing like the logic and the strategy part of it. And
Yeah.
because I think like even when you look at these days and the Transparency Act, like it should be like just hygiene factor, right? In terms of reducing risk and like ensuring resilience in your value chain. So, but I guess that's how it is with most transformational changes that are happening. Like it's going to be a learning curve, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think it's also really difficult to sort of argue that they should have done it in another way, because
yeah,
I realize the need for reporting requirements, and I realize that those are gonna bring frustrations to the SME sector. But again, um, it might be a necessary step to put it on the agenda to sort of force businesses to start thinking about it, and then we can help them to do it the right way. But you need to have advisors and consultants that are capable of sort of helping them to think broader about sustainability than reporting, in order to make the reporting sort of the last step, instead of starting with reporting and asking them, or the having the clients ask us, how can I be compliant as easily and as fast as possible?
definitely. And I think that leads us on to a very important topic that I was hoping to discuss today, and that's regarding, as we have been discussing now and also previously in our discussions, how a lot of companies today approach sustainability as a compliance measure, and that's kind of what they see and uh, how they define sustainability in their own work as well. Um, and what is your experience with that, and what do you think are kind of the main challenges in terms of companies, approaching sustainability as a compliance measure?
Really? Um, I think, first of all, I understand why they do. um, because when you have an SME, especially SMEs, you don't have a lot of extra time and resources. You're very cost sensitive because you have usually sort of low yields, and most of your days just sort of disappear into
Mm.
basic running your business. So I can understand why they are seen as compliance, and sort of the risks of doing this is that you sort of miss innovation, as we have talked about a lot about before. But I also think that it makes you really vulnerable in terms of changing regulations. Because if you always aim to just meet the bar, the low, sort of the low bar of regulations, then you're always going to fall behind. Because for every new regulation or requirement that comes along, you will have to change the way you're doing it. And you always sort of add additional steps instead of doing it the right way from the beginning.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the issues as well, is that when you focus your business on the financial KPIs exclusively, it's always going to be an externality or something additional you have to do. But if you start incorporating sustainability and purpose as part of what you're doing everyday life, the reporting requirements are going to be a swift process.
Yeah.
Um, and it's something I think that also computer systems and accounting software is going to do for you. But the software can never change the way you look at sustainability. That's something you have to do as an SME owner yourself.
Mm. Exactly. And I think, like you mentioned it, in terms of, they, especially SMEs, they have, a lot on their plate. They're cost sensitive, and you know, their main objective might be to kind of keep the company running, and they don't have time for any extra tasks or extra projects on the side, which sustainability unfortunately often is. Um, so what do you think, like looking at the contrary, like on the other side of this, imagine like a perfect startup that had, or a perfect SME that had sustainability integrated into their business model and their way of working. Like,
Mm.
what do you think are the biggest gaps between like the traditional business model or the traditional companies as they are today, and how we envision a sustainable business model and a sustainable company?
Um, First of all, I think a lot of it has to do with purpose and why the business is doing what it's doing. Um, because I think that if you, I believe that a business should really exist to solve problems. And I think that's one of the best ways of starting out a sustainable business as well. Because if you focus on a problem and solving a problem, then you're gonna have a lot of exciting opportunities that you wouldn't necessarily have if your only goal is to make a profit. And especially if you start looking at your ecosystem, the all of the businesses you interact with or share a purpose with, you have a lot more possibilities in order to earn money as well.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the main differences, that businesses starting with sustainability as sort of a core value don't really think about sustainability. They just think about being a good business.
Exactly.
And that's what I think is sort of the biggest contrasts of all, that people and businesses that care about sustainability, I think they use the least amount of time on
Yeah.
sustainability, because
Yeah.
it's such a natural part of their day to day.
Mm.
And I think that's sort of the main difference. Yeah, that you don't think of it as something additional. You just think of it as a part of
Mm.
doing business.
Yeah. It's just an integrated part of the core strategy and the core kind of operations, and it's just yeah, 100%. And I think it's also interesting to see like other startups that I've spoken with that are like um, they're doing innovation, they're solving a problem, and they're like, yeah, but we don't know how we're going to approach sustainability. How do we make sure that sustainability is part? And then they explain their business model, and it is basically making their business model was about making the current solution more sustainable, but they didn't know it. It was like optimizing it, reducing a lot of hardware and a lot of physical aspects. They digitized a lot of things, and it's just so interesting to see that. I think a lot of companies see sustainability, as you said, as an add-on, as like measuring data and kind of reporting and being compliant. But in reality, it's a lot about innovating, as you said, and
Yeah.
optimizing.
And I think a lot of startups, especially today, really have sustainability as as an important driver,
Yeah.
because, as you said, it's often to find a solution to an existing problem that they started out with. And when they're doing that, either they are producing products that are um, cheaper, and by cheaper, they are using less material, and they are probably better sourced. So innovation is sort of the main, at least I believe that innovation is really the only way to become more sustainable. And I think that the businesses that have the biggest difficulty becoming more sustainable is the um, sort of established SMEs that are profitable, that don't really see a need to change.
Mm.
And I think um, that's going to be a problem. Short term, it's going to be a problem for us, because they don't want any help becoming more sustainable. But sort of a longer timeline, I think they will have difficulties adapting at a later stage, because they
Mm.
sort of gradually fall behind.
Yeah.
Um,
And that brings us also over to what you're doing now, I guess, a bit. So, so we discussed your starting point in your career, but now you work at Vekstpartner, and you work a lot with sustainability, helping companies become more sustainable in a way. And so, would you like to just tell a bit about your journey to Vekstpartner and what you're working with there?
mm, yeah, so I'm lucky enough to be a part of Vekstpartner. We're a small consulting firm. Um, we started out, or we have a purpose where we want to contribute to the creation of jobs, um, and through an active involvement in and development of innovative companies and well-functioning innovation ecosystems. It's a mouthful, but what we want to do really is help businesses succeed. Um, so we do this in a few different ways. One of the points we do is helping startups, helping them find their business models, and also helping them find investors, helping them, yeah, just to get a good start, really. And except for that, we also provide advisory services to established companies. And we have a few ecosystem projects, we call them. That's sort of cooperative projects with other either other companies or research institutions. So yeah, it's quite a lot of different things, but relating to sustainability, there are mainly two things. One of them is Smart Circ, which is a project with 4 production companies, and also SINTEF, a research organization, and the Center of Applied Research at NHH, or the Norwegian Business School. And the aim of that project is to help production companies find circular business models. And that's a really, really interesting project, because you have a lot of possibilities, a lot of opportunities, but you could also see sort of the struggle there between day-to-day operations and innovation and challenging the way you do business, because that's really hard. Especially when you have a profitable business model um, already. So why would you make any changes to that model? And often one can argue that every business should become more sustainable, but most companies need a reason to do so. They don't just wake up one day and think we want to become sustainable today. And
Unfortunately.
yeah, unfortunately, that would make our job a lot easier. So what we're looking at is how can you make businesses both more sustainable and more profitable? And that's a really interesting way of looking at things.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have to look at sort of how much do you have to do in order to become more sustainable, and what's that going to cost? So you get sort of a really interesting elasticity between sustainability and profitability, um, that I think is going to be interesting to follow.
Yeah, and I think in that specific project that you're talking about, I can imagine that there are so many um, both opportunities but also challenges. Like when you first kind of unlock these opportunities in terms of more circular business models that can encompass, new income streams or reduced cost or, refurbishment and recycling opportunities that are smart and they make business sense. But then there are so many like things that we don't even think about in terms of like infrastructure and regulations that are actually prohibiting these things in a way or making it very difficult. Um, do you have any examples of that, both like the challenges you've seen, but also the opportunities you've seen in these kind of projects?
I think that maybe one of the main things is that the businesses don't really realize the potential of changing their business model, because often, or especially in a project like this, it's easy to think that you will just change the product, just change the materials that are used. But as you mentioned, it's really about a lot more. When you start looking at how are you going to get paid for the products, how are you going to ship them, how are you going to package them, there the questions just keep piling up. and and that's really fun as well, because you sort of get a restart uh, for a project or for the products they are making, because it's not about just the production phase. There's so many other aspects that are just as important. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir when I'm telling you this, because I have taken a few sneak peeks at the model you have developed. But yeah, I think that's sort of the main thing that people think it's just about the materials you use, but it's about so much more. And I think that's something that sometimes scares the businesses because they thought they were just going to use other materials, but in reality, it's about changing pretty much everything you do.
Mm, definitely. And that's why I also think, obviously, the biggest challenges are going to be to transform these very big and established corporations that I think, like, some people argue that, you know, they're going to die out and new startups are going to take over, with new business models and new ways of doing it. But then again, like, you know, if we're dependent on these big corporations changing their business model, it's going to be
It's
a
gonna
lot
be
of work.
messy.
It's going to be
Yeah.
messy. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because they often talk about like Kodak or these other sort of dinosaurs dying out when new technology came along. And
mm,
I think that, yeah, to some extent, you might see the same happening here.
mm,
But it's going to be interesting to see whether it's because they stop making money due to their compliance attitude,
mm,
or whether it's going to be sort of due to their having sort of costs that they could have been spared if they
mm,
change the way they do business. So it's going to be really interesting to see in the next years.
definitely. And I think also you've been mentioning ecosystems, and I know that you're very, you see the importance and value of ecosystems and collaborations across industries, and how necessary that is. And I just remember from my previous job where I worked at a manufacturing company, and we were looking into, both like more innovative business model, like sales models, but
Mm.
also being able to take back products that have, very durable products and refurbish them or recycle parts of the products that are very valuable. Um, we realized that there were so many challenges, both in terms of, as I mentioned, like regulatory challenges, such as, the logistics around, you know, um, transporting something that is waste, then suddenly you're not allowed to. Like, there's so many things that you have to get into, but also in terms of the technology, because the technology was there to be able to take back the products and reassemble it and recycle it, but it needs such large volumes in order for it to be,
Yeah.
manageable economically. But
Mm.
then we saw, okay, if we're going to be able to do that, we would have to collaborate with others. And that's like, I think, a main topic in this discussion, like the need
Yeah.
for ecosystems, and yeah.
And we have spent so many years learning how to take raw materials and put them into finished goods, but we haven't even started to go the other way on an industrial scale.
Mm,
It's still about taking out raw materials, processing them, and getting, the bolts and everything that goes into a product. But we haven't really found a good way of taking those bolts out again and
mm,
bringing them back down to sort of their basic elements in order to get a functioning circular economy. Um,
mm,
at least not yet. And I remember having a discussion about circular economy a few months ago, and it's the just the concept of talking about linear economy is something that's really so new. It's
mm,
something we started pretty much in the last 100 years. Before that, everything was recycled because raw materials were expensive, they were hard to get by. And
mm,
I think that's sort of the challenge we are facing now is that material costs are just too low for us to be really committed into creating good um, and circular value chains.
mm,
We really need to start focusing on how do we disassemble as good as we assemble.
mm,
And that I think that's going to be a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity in terms of technology. If
mm,
we can create an ecosystem that is as good as taking things apart that as we are at putting them together, that's a
Mm.
really good starting point.
But also, like, how do you design the product in the first place?
Mm.
Is it possible to take apart and recycle afterwards? How do you combine the materials to make it recyclable? Like,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, there are so many elements that needs to be assessed. It's not only like the end product or the circular model or the material, but it's kind of the whole process together. And I think that's kind of the main issues that companies don't comprehend to assess it
Mm.
holistically and understand the full picture of it.
Mm. It's going to be really interesting to see.
Yeah. But I also wanted to discuss economics of mutuality. I remember when we first met, I had never heard about it, and you introduced me to this concept, which I thought was very interesting. And that's something that you in Vekstpartner work a bit with. So why don't you take us through what economics of mutuality is?
Yeah. And economics of mutuality is it's I would like to say that it's a mindset, but it started out as a project within Mars, the producer of chocolates and dog food, among other things. And they started by asking themselves the question of how much profit is it okay to generate? And um, after a few years and some work, they realized that it's not about how much profit a single company makes, but how much value it creates for the ecosystem that it's a part of. And basically, you go from thinking of your own company in the center of the ecosystem to thinking of it as a part of a network. And it's almost like so if you compare it to Copernicus and the planets, it's like stopping thinking about Earth as the center of the universe. You sort of look at the whole solar system instead.
Mm.
And it's really one of the frameworks that I use the most because it's so applicable for businesses, because there are some defined steps that you should go through in order to get a better understanding of your place in the ecosystem. And
Mm.
it really starts out with defining your company's purpose. And according to Economics of Mutuality, your purpose should be to solve a problem. And they define also sustainability as being able to solve the problems of people and planet without creating new problems,
Mm.
but you have to do it profitably.
Mm.
And I think that's a really good starting point. And there's also this quote that I really like, and it's that you should think of profit for a company is like oxygen for a person. If you don't have enough of it, you're out of the game. But if you think your life is about breathing, you're really missing something. And I think and I think that's really powerful quote, because if the sole purpose of a business is to make money, then it's
Mm.
not really contributing anything. And that's sort of our starting point with economics and mutuality as well, is that when we help either startups or established businesses, we help them to create a purpose that's relevant to what they're doing and
Mm.
something that they can measure progress towards. And I think that's a really important first step, that you need to measure your progress in something more than just the financial KPIs.
Mm.
And I think also that's where a lot of the established businesses are going to struggle,
Mm.
because when they just measure financial KPIs and not sort of your commitment or your progress towards your purpose, it's so easy to get sidetracked and do things that are not in line with your purpose and what you're supposed to be doing.
Definitely. And I also remember that you shared some experience and some kind of examples and cases from doing this exercise, and that it has shown that when companies actually do this exercise and, being very clear on their purpose and also kind of, creating or like improving a purpose that is not self-centric in a way, that it's actually contributing to something bigger. It actually, and if you do that correctly and kind of map out the ecosystem, it can actually unlock so many opportunities. So do you have any like examples, or is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, there are many examples, but one of them is from Economics of Mutuality themselves, and it's Novo Nordisk, the producer of the Ozempic, among other things,
That's
which
very, very.
yeah, maybe not the best example of
So
products,
they're
but
making a lot of profit these days.
yeah, but they started out with a purpose of eliminating diabetes. But they quickly realized that that wasn't something that they could really achieve, because a lot of people with diabetes will never get treatment because treatment is really expensive and inaccessible for a lot of people.
Mm,
So they worked together with Economics of Mutuality, and they came up with improving the quality of life for diabetics. Um, and that opens a ton of other possibilities, and it's also much more exciting for people to contribute to that, because there are a lot more companies that can contribute to improving quality of life for a group of people than the number of people that can help to eliminate diabetes. Because
mm,
if your purpose is to eliminate diabetes, you really only need scientists and money, and that's
mm,
everything you need. But if you want to improve the quality of life, there are so many other actors in the ecosystem that are relevant, whether it's food manufacturers or health professionals, or yeah, pretty much everyone can be a part of your ecosystem.
mm,
And I think one of the most sort of powerful examples they shared was that they noticed a city in, I believe it was America, where a lot of people, a lot more than the statistics, had diabetes. And
mm,
they realized that it was due to the poor water quality and the fact that water was more expensive than sodas.
um,
Um, so people were drinking sodas instead of water,
mm,
and contributing to the higher diabetes counts.
mm,
So they started a project in order to get clean water to this town or this city, which resulted, of course, in less diabetes, but also for Novo Nordisk, it was great marketing. And I think that's a good example of how a business can do good while doing good.
mm,
And that's sort of one of the starting points with Economics of Mutuality. It's not about reducing your profits, but
mm,
it's about making profits in ways that are helping people.
mm,
And we have also used it on a lot of startups and established businesses. And the most sort of profound way we're seeing that it's helping is that it's changing the way they talk about themselves.
mm,
And it's changing the way they are connecting to either potential customers or potential cooperative companies.
yeah.
So when they're starting with their purpose, it's so much easier to identify. If you come to a company saying, I want to change the world, that's so much more that's a bad purpose, but it's still much more inspiring than saying, do you want to buy my product? And I think that's sort of the most valuable thing about it.
Mm, definitely. I think it's a really interesting framework and something that I think everyone should do, both to kind of, check your own purpose and check your own system or ecosystem, but also to be able to identify new opportunities or optimization of your business model. So it's a really
Yeah.
interesting framework.
Yeah, and especially when you sort of start out with asking the other actors what are their challenges in being a force towards the purpose you're chasing,
Mm,
and then helping them solve those problems. You're both solving other people's problems while also contributing to your own purpose, and
mm.
that's what business should be about.
So now we're closing in towards the end. The time has gone by so fast. But I do have one last question, and maybe the most difficult question. So based on your experience and also your view on the opportunities within approaching sustainability in the right way, what is your main kind of suggestion or tip towards companies that want to get started um, on really, encompassing sustainability
Mm.
into their business model and into their everyday work?
Wow, that is a big question. But I think that one of the main things is to challenge the way you're doing things today. I don't think that there's uh, sort of one correct answer to this, uh, but starting with sort of what are you doing? Really assessing what your business is doing,
Mm,
and finding, sort of going back to the roots. What problem are you solving, and how could you solve those problems more effectively?
mm,
I think that's a good starting point because historically, every business has existed to solve problems. And if you focus and sort of fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve,
mm,
you might get um, different sort of ideas of what you should be doing than what you're doing today. And I think it's really easy to get stuck in sort of doing the same thing. But if you do the same thing, you're gonna have the same results. So
mm,
you need to change up how you're doing business. And it's not it's I don't think there's one thing you should do, but start with the problem you're solving and work your way back from that.
mm. That's a very good tip. Very concrete. Well, thank you so much, Martin, for joining in on our first episode. I think it has been a very interesting talk. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of your perspectives and experiences. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to more conversations like
Yes.
this.
We'll definitely need to do this again.
Yeah.